So does God give slavery 2 thumbs up? Hi, and welcome to Faith in Front. Today we want to address this topic of slavery in the Bible. And for some, when they see this topic in the Bible, they automatically assume that God is giving it a 2 thumbs up. Well, one of the mistakes that we can make sometimes when we approach the Bible, when we read the Bible, and it's a mistake you don't want to do, the first thing you want to do is you want to ask yourself, is what I'm reading prescriptive, telling me something to do, or is it descriptive, just describing something? When you think about the story of David and Bathsheba, right? There's murder, there's deception. I mean, like, talk about a soap opera, right? I mean, there's lying, deception, murder, adultery, all of that, right? Now, that doesn't mean God is condoning murder and adultery and all that stuff. It's just describing a story. And the Bible is describing God's interaction with mankind, with all of man's junk, the good, the bad, and the ugly. God is interacting. So you don't want to make the mistake of just because it's in the Bible, that means God is giving it a 2 thumbs up. Something else you have to keep in mind is that you don't want to pour into the scripture your frame of reference for slavery, right? I can remember when I saw Roots. I'm telling my age. I can remember when I saw Roots. And that was really like the first TV miniseries that really got into the horrors of slavery, right? And I mean, I can still remember that scene where, you know, they chop off Kunta Kinte's toe and, you know, stuff like that, and the assault of Kizzy, and, you know, I mean, you know, and I'm really young. I'm a kid when I watched this, and now that's in the 70s. Now, since then, there have been many movies, Amistad, different movies that have been more graphic with the description of slavery in this country. And there's a tendency to pour that into the slavery that we see in Scripture. The slavery that we see in Scripture was more of a indentured servitude. If there was a famine, a lot of times people would put themselves into slavery to someone to work so they wouldn't starve. They would even say, hey, my children can work for you so that they wouldn't starve. Or if you needed to pay a debt, then you would work. And then at the end of the 6 years, you could go free or you could stay. It wasn't this chattel slavery that we know of here. Your human dignity stayed intact, unlike the chattel slavery. You were more like a piece of property, and your human dignity was stripped from you. So that's something else you have to keep in mind when you look at slavery in the Bible, is not to pour in your frame of reference to the type of slavery that was going on. Now, someone will say, well, it's still wrong. I mean, slavery, I mean, you know, it's wrong. And why is God, you know, why is God for it? Well, I don't conclude that God is for it. Well, you might say, well, you know, 1 Peter 2:18, it says slaves, you know, submit to your masters. You hear that a lot. Slaves, obey your masters. You hear that a lot. But no one ever quotes Colossians 4:1, where it says, masters, provide your slave with what is right and fair, because you have a master in heaven. Now, we know all the horrors and all the terrible images that come to our mind when we think of slavery. There's nothing right and fair about it. So you see this difference. And we also have to keep in mind, too, that if God was like 2 thumbs up for slavery, why would he use Moses to free the Israelites from bondage? Why wouldn't he just go, oh, well, you know, sorry? But he heard the cry from being in bondage, and he delivered them out of it. And even when you look at the 9th commandment, thou shalt not steal. Okay. I believe that meant people too, right? It wasn't like God was like, well, don't take the goat. You take him. I mean, that. So even like people who were stolen and put into slavery. Okay. You don't steal people either. And then even when you look at 1 Timothy, the 1st chapter, the 10th verse, slave trading is condemned in that particular passage. Slave trading is condemned in 1 Timothy 1:10. So you have these passages of scripture where we can walk away knowing that God is not giving slavery a 2 thumbs up. Now some will go, well, it still looks like he was putting parameters in place for slavery. He was putting things in place. So does that make God okay with it? Well, no. One of the things you have to keep in mind is that God also puts parameters and provisions in place for divorce, but he hates it. God hates divorce, but he still puts some things in place, because what we have to keep in mind is that God knows his creation. He even said, Moses only gave you a certificate of divorce because of the hardness of your heart. You're stubborn. Okay, so it's interesting. People talk about this word tolerance. God is the most tolerant being, right? He's the most tolerant because he's not for, he wasn't like, hey, slavery, but because he knows, man, okay, since this is the way you're going to act. And we have to remember, too, that slavery in the scripture, in the Bible, it's not like the slavery that we know of in this country. And I think a lot of times people make it the same. And they think that because some parameters was put in place for it, God was going. Okay, no, God wasn't going 2 thumbs up for slavery just because he puts parameter in place. You may have a job that you don't agree with everything about it, but you still may have to put parameters in place because of the circumstance, right? It doesn't mean you automatically agree with it. And yes, God doesn't always intervene with man and stop man from doing his thing. Sometimes God will just corral the situation a certain way because he knows how man can be. So I think there's enough passages that lets us know that God will allow something that's not the ideal to take place for whatever reason that he has for not stepping in. I mean, when you look at abortion, I don't think God is for it, but it's been allowed for many years. Okay. Even though it's been legal, he's allowed it to be legal and things like that. That doesn't mean God is for it. So slavery is a fallen social construct. And I say fallen because mankind is fallen. And because of our fallen nature, we have put some constructs in that are not ideal. And God will tolerate certain things for a period of time. So I hope this gives you a little clarity. You could do such a deeper dive on this. I'm trying to be conscious of your time, but you could do a much deeper dive on this topic. And one resource, basically, it's Is God a Moral Monster by Paul Copan. Now, this is a great resource if you want to do a deeper dive on this topic of slavery in the Bible. He really goes into it much more of a detail than I just did. I just wanted to throw out a few points. At the end of the day, I believe the slavery that God is for is when we become a slave to him. Now, you might say, well, I don't like that. But see, what you got to realize, though, when the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Yes, God, he is a God of oxymorons at times. Okay, it sounds weird. It's like, why would I want to be a slave to God? Because really, when you become a slave to God, that's when you really become free. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. When you walk with God, you are walking with truth. And where truth is, that's where liberty is. So I pray that this has been somewhat helpful. And as I said, you could look at Paul Copan's book if you want to do a deeper dive on it yourself, because you can. I mean, there are people who talk on this for hours. And so I feel even kind of a little weird about just this period of time I've given to it, because you can go so much deeper with it. But hopefully it's giving you just some clarity. So keep your faith in front.